Welcome back to Encouraging Things. The other day I was looking around my desk and I saw two innocuous objects that normally wouldn't go together. In this case, those items were a 10 milliliter syringe cap and a speaker from a pair of Dollar-phone earbuds. I was immediately reminded of Mr. Handy's iPod camera thing and set off to find the parts and pieces I needed to make my own Mr. Handy. I began with the legs, which required quite a bit of trimming in order to get all the parts to fit together. To extend the Final Faction parts legs that I was using in order to make them long enough for Mr. Handy, I decided to use a second pair of legs and just extend to using those same bits, which also required quite a bit of trimming. Throughout this build, I didn't have an idea of what I was going to use for individual parts and pieces. So as I progressed, I ended up finding things in a small pile on my desk that turned out to work really well. Like the small rocket piece that I used to connect the joints of the knees together for Mr. Handy's legs. I also had to scratch build the tools at the end of each of the legs. I decided to start with the buzzsaw, as I knew where I could acquire a piece for it. Of course, it did require me to disassemble a mummy. The other tools were made from various parts and pieces found around my desk. It was actually so quick to make that if you blink, you'll miss it. This is a CD holder from an old DVD player I had. I ended up cutting it off camera as it was too finicky to do on camera. For the eye, I first cut out an L shape from the syringe cap. After that, I had to perform eye surgery on a pair of googly eyes. The domed cap on the googly eyes would make a perfect cap for Mr. Handy's eye. If you decide to do this, just be very, very careful. Cutting these can be very finicky and very dangerous. For the mechanical bits inside the eye, I couldn't find any pieces of plastic that fit well, so I used model magic to make my own. For the main body, I used a plastic shell from a coin machine that had a convenient flat bottom. I cut out 3 holes for the eye stalks off camera, which left me with these small pieces of plastic that I was going to use for the eye shields, only they were too small, so I made some new ones. For the eye stalks, I decided to use a couple of sprues that I had left over from some Gundam model kits. The pieces I cut out initially, which had an L shape to them, were too short. So instead I cut off some corner pieces from the same sprues. For the back of the body, with the exhaust vent, I initially drew a rough draft of how I wanted it to look, using this piece from a previous build as a template. Once the section was cut out, it was a perfect fit for the new piece. In order to build a frame for the interior of Mr. Handy, I used more bits of the sprues I'd used previously. So that the interior wasn't completely hollow, I was going to fill it with aluminum foil. That wasn't a perfect solution, so in addition I added mold magic to the base. For his rocket engine, I started out with this Gundam rocket launcher. And then added some greaves to it in order to fill it out. And with all the core components finished, it was time to assemble. After he was assembled, I added a couple of greaves, including a couple of front grills, as well as a back plate on the back of his dome. For the base, I decided to use the roof of this car wash that I found from the Dollar Tree. The roof is shaped somewhat like a radiation symbol, which shouldn't worry anybody at all. I wanted to try texturing the base before I primed it. To do that, I used this correctional fluid. It worked out okay, but I put it on a little thin, so in the future I'll just have to add more layers, and I think it'll make good results. Once the base was primed and dried, it was time to paint it. I was of course going to use blue and yellow as classic Fallout colors. However, I had just seen a video by Bill Making Stuff where he covered everything in a layer of brown in order to simulate rust. So instead I switched to brown for the first layer. From there I switched to blue and began to paint in the radiation symbol. Again, I tried to mimic Bill's way of painting by leaving a gap around the edges in order to simulate where the paint had been worn away. This left a soft edge which I wasn't really happy about. From there I needed to use the yellow paint. And I'm not very good with yellow paint, and I was trying to avoid it as long as possible. From the moment I put down the first layer of paint, I could see that it already started to pull up the brown and mix, turning it into a kind of orangey color. But I continued to trudge on, hoping that it would get better. And as I added more and more yellow, I started to get more and more frustrated with what I was seeing. And this led to an interesting turn of events. Not liking the soft edges around the paint, and definitely not liking the way the yellow paint came out, I decided to dry brush the entire thing in brown again. And where normally I would have a softer touch, I was so frustrated with what I had painted that I wanted to hide the yellow. I wanted to destroy it with the brown. And so I went very heavy-handed with the dry brush. After the layer of brown, I then added a small touch of orange for new rust, and then went over the edges with some rub and buff in order to show scratches. Finally, I added one last layer of dry brush brown in order to dull all the colors. For some added weathering, I decided to add some bits and pieces to the base itself, mostly dirt and grime. I mixed up a batch of watered down glue. I didn't really take measurements, so it's about that much to that much. I had a few choices as to what to use for my dirt and grime. I could use some pastel chalks, some sawdust I had collected, but instead I decided to use some Tuscan heat spice that came with a HelloFresh box. Not sponsored. While applying my glue solution, I found out that surface tension was going to be an issue, so I ended up saturating the base with glue, and then sucking up the excess. This had the added advantage of pulling a lot of the debris towards the corners where it would naturally land anyway. As with the base, I decided to paint Mr. Handy brown in order to have a base rust layer before I put the paint on. I had originally asked my patrons what they thought I should make this Mr. Handy into, and they said make it into a raider. I wasn't a real big fan of that idea, only because I didn't want to make it an entirely rusty Mr. Handy. Joke's on me, I guess. I had had such great results with the dry brushing of the base that I decided to do the entire Mr. Handy the same way. The style of painting was mentioned by 52 Miniatures in his recent upload regarding painting wargaming terrain. Oddly enough, I discovered it the same day he uploaded that video. Mr. Handy is a ubiquitous type of robot in the Fallout universe, but every once in a while you can run into one that is unique in its personality and its name. This Mr. Handy is no different. His name is Dusty. Not too long before the bombs fell, Dusty was bought by a Midwest used car salesman, who had him painted red, white, and blue, as used car salesmen in the Midwest are like to do. And he had him upgraded with a couple of extra features like better grills and beefier legs. But when the bombs fell and the city was evacuated, Dusty was left alone to continue to try to sell used cars to whoever happened to pass by. Now, one day, a farmer from the outskirts of town had to dive deeper into the city in order to find supplies. He came across Dusty trying to sell a burned out Chrysalis to a feral ghoul. Well, with a little Midwest maintenance, the farmer convinced Dusty that maybe selling used cars wasn't the best use of his time, and took him back to the farm. Now, over the years, the farmer taught Dusty everything he needed to know about running a farm. How to herd Brahmin, how to tend crops, how to deal with mole rat infestations. Over time, the farmer got old, and eventually passed away. Now Dusty spends his time running the farm. Every once in a while, a trader or a traveler will pass through and show surprise that a Mr. Handy is taking care of this big farm all by himself. But Dusty doesn't pay them no mind. He lets them stay as long as they need, trades for goods when necessary, and generally enjoys himself being a farmer. But every once in a while, he'll try to sell somebody a tractor, for old time's sake. In order to complete the cowboy look for Dusty, I decided to make him a small lasso out of some twine that I found. Again, if you decide to make anything like this, please be very careful. Fire is dangerous, even in small amounts. Along with his lasso, I got him a cowboy hat. This came out of a random selection of junk bot parts. And last, as well as the most important part, is a small piece of reed grass sticking out of his grill, which was made from a bit of garden wire and some additional pieces of twine. And with that, Dusty's finished. So how did it turn out? It is by far my best piece. I never would have thought that from a random selection of junk sitting on my desk I'd have been able to make a Mr. Handy model, especially one that looks so good. The painting came out wonderfully, despite my hiccups. And the new techniques I stumbled across are ones that I'm definitely going to be using in the future. So once again, I'd like to encourage you to look around your area, find things that remind you of stuff, and create your own robots and models. And if you liked the video today, please feel free to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to find out more of what I do, both here on YouTube and on the internet at large, you can visit my website at fordable.com. And once again, thank you for watching.